Right, welcome everybody. So I finally introduce Vimla. She's here to explore the transformative concepts of conscious culture and intentional human design. She's co-founder and the director of culture design at Honey Badger, and she's dedicated to creating safe and thriving workplace through fierce change. So here you go, welcome, and have a lot of fun watching.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? It's not too loud. Sorry? Okay, thank you. Hello everyone, welcome to the talk today. I hope we spend this hour together, and I'll be talking for about 45 minutes and I'll leave some time at the end for a Q&A as well. So please hold all your questions till the very end and we'll try and get through as many as we can. So, as mentioned, I'm the Director of Culture Design at Honey Badger, or the Chief Culture Officer. I kind of flip between the two, which is the fun of being a startup. We're a culture change organisation working with businesses in the private and public sector to understand how to design their team cultures to improve their experiences, but also measure the things that matter so that you continually improve over time. And I'll touch on a few of the ways we do that as well throughout this talk. But before I get started, I just want to let you all know that I am an introvert, and the reason I kind of squirreled away in a little room on my own for the hour before this is because I get very shaky and nervous. And I do public speaking quite a lot, but it never gets easier. I kind of get the same level of nerves every time, and actually when it's a room like this, it's probably my most nervous, so bear with me. And if my voice drops, someone at the back just put their hand up to say you can't hear. I'm also a brown woman, which adds to my insecurities when I do this talk, because often, particularly at tech events, there aren't many people who look like me or identify as me up on stage talking about things that are this important or in the technology space. And I think part of my vulnerability is actually getting that out into the room to recognise that difference and to own it, because I hope to be a person who can lay the groundwork for people who look like me to continue to do this in the future as well. And I'm also a mum, and I had to take out new mum from my slides because I don't think I am a new mum anymore. My daughter's 2 years old. But the change has been an absolute whirlwind, and even 2 years in, my brain flips between this is everything I have to do for work, this is my kind of schedule, this is what I'm doing. Have I remembered nappies in the nappy bag for my daughter while she's being looked after? Has she had her nap? What's she eating? And I'll be thinking about those kind of threefold away whilst I'm giving this talk as well. And that is just a whole new whirlwind. So yeah, that's been a big change and a huge change to my identity. And also, as I go through this presentation, the reasons I'm telling you all of this will become clearer, because this is why we need conscious culture design in organisations. So, as a result of all of that, I am very nervous. So bear with me as we go on this journey and talk about why conscious culture can change your business and how important it is to be able to have spaces for people to be vulnerable and talk about these things when we go out into the world and as employers. So, on that note, I'm going to start with a slide about what's going on at the moment. And in the present day, at this moment in time, we're at a huge crossroads with what's happening internationally. And I'm from the UK and have immigrant parents, and I think when you look out into the global landscape, there's a lot going on. There's a war happening in Ukraine at the moment, and that is on our doorstep, and it's ever prominent, and it's right there in the forefront of our minds of this is happening here, this is really relevant. And particularly in the UK, we've seen it in the news a lot, and there's been government initiatives to try and support Ukrainian refugees. But there's also a war happening in Sudan, and just today the BBC News declared that it was on the verge of ethnic cleansing happening across Sudanese villages, the way the militia are kind of taking over the country. And of course we have the conflict in Israel and Palestine, where we're seeing atrocities happen. Sorry, I'm just gonna move this a little bit. Can you still hear me? okay, just because I can hear myself breathing and it's very off-putting. We have atrocities happening across the country, and the reason I bring this up isn't to make a statement on what's happening or to present a political opinion, but it's just to show the atrocities that are happening across the world that are impacting us, whether we realise it or not, in the way that we might be experiencing everyday life. But what's more important is when we look at news websites, so this is the BBC News, you've got the Israel-Gaza war, you've got the war in Ukraine. The Sudanese war is not mentioned in the top headlines at all. And when we start to think about conscious culture and the way that this happens internationally and the narratives that we present and the way we might be experiencing things, subliminally what this tells us is we prioritise different types of news over others. And when you dig deeper into that, what it's saying is we prioritise different lives over others. The war in Sudan never made it to the top headline here, but the death toll is probably 10 times higher than what's happening in Israel, Palestine and the Ukraine. But the way that we, as...
I'm just going to disturb you too, as in like put up the mic a little bit.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. Oh, I just moved it. Thanks.
Maybe that's better.
Is that okay? Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Less breathy, more talky. Yeah. Thank you. That's much better. Oh, I can relax a bit more now. So what we can see here is it's not just the headlines that are important, but what it tells us about the way we prioritise life or the narratives that we're telling ourselves. And again, I'm not saying this as a political statement. I just want us to be conscious of the way news is fed to us, the way we engage with media, and what it is telling us about the ways that we're told to prioritise what's going on in the world is often dictated to us, rather than us being conscious about how we explore it. And as I say, this isn't about politics. I'm not here to make a statement on who we should be supporting or where we stand on this. I'm saying this is about empathy and the way we try and need to be more conscious of what are we excluding from the discussions that we're having? How is this impacting our colleagues? What if people have family in these countries or just are getting beat down by hearing it in the news every day? How are we providing safe spaces in the places that we work to have open conversations about how people are feeling about topics that are happening? And it's not just the atrocities of war that this refers to, it's protests, it's climate change, it's everything and anything that people might hold dear to them. What are we doing to empathise with the way people are experiencing the world in our workplaces so that they can have conversations about it and engage in conversations around supporting them through whatever it is that is they're experiencing? Because it's time that we stop asking people to be one person at work and one person at home and encouraging people to be their true selves in the workplace so that we can start to do things to make this better. So what does this have to do with culture? There's a great book called What You Do Is Who You Are by Ben Horowitz, which talks about how you bring yourself to work and what culture really is. And the bit that's important in this quote is that everything is revealed when something happens. So whether that's your business going through turmoil or redundancies in the tech space or AI taking our jobs through to global wars or whatever it might be, the strength and the impact of an organisation is really measured when something happens. So at times of difficulty, at times when things are tough, that's when employees can really show their strength to their employees and say, this is how we're going to look after you, this is how we've got your back, and in turn that creates employee loyalty. So what I'm trying to say is that all of these things, whether it's what's happening in Israel and Palestine, whether it's what's happening in Sudan, whether it's the climate crisis, whatever it might be, it is culture. Because culture is everything that happens to us and how we experience the world around us. It's everything that makes you you. So it's every touch point, every experience, every kind of mental model that you've created. It's all of the things that make you as a person. And those in turn determine your set of values and behaviours. So all of the ways we experience the world determine our behaviours, and they're both conscious and unconscious. It's the way we navigate the world. And it's really interesting when we start looking at these in ourselves to understand what that looks and feels like in what we do. And it's at this point I think it's really, really important to remember that the technology that we put out into the world at the moment fails the global majority every day. So the technology that we're building, because it is often built by people who think and think the same means that it solves the problems of the people who think the same rather than the diverse group in the global majority. And the crux of this talk is really focused on this, is that when we start to build conscious cultures, we build diverse organisations and teams that help bring better technology, products and solutions out into the world that can have a more positive impact. And I actively go against the move fast and break things methodology that was set out in kind of traditional startup culture. I think we're at a point where technology doesn't need to move fast and it doesn't need to break things anymore. We can slow down and build it with everyone in mind and do it in the right way, because actually in the long run it saves us time and it saves us money, because we put something good out into the world the first time round rather than having to fix it as we go. And there's hundreds of examples where this has happened. I'll talk about one now where the government in the UK launched a Get Your Passport Online service, which was great. So instead of having to go to the post office and submit a physical copy for your passport, you could do it all online through photo recognition technology. But they hadn't tested it with anyone who wasn't white. So it didn't work for people of colour, and it didn't work for anyone kind of from Chinese heritage backgrounds. And it made the news and it was in the headlines because it didn't work for everyone. And it was a really typical narrative of move fast and break things, because it worked for a certain set of people that they were able to build for and get it out quickly. They then had to quickly rebuild it in the background to get it out to work for the majority of people. And what it says to us is often good enough is good enough for the people in the room, not good enough for everyone. So when we're thinking about how to move through technology, we have to be understanding of who we're missing in the room and whether we're doing it consciously or unconsciously. So to bring it back right into the workplace, how does culture work in the workplace? It's how people behave when no one's looking. So when we're out there doing our jobs and you haven't got someone kind of checking in on you, and particularly in the world of today where working from home has become the norm, that's what our culture in the workplace is. And so traditionally what this looks like is having your business culture at the heart of an organisation, so often set from the top, so your founders or directors saying this is how we work, these are our values as a business, and they then determine what your team culture is. So your team lead might take what your business leader, your CEO has said and say, okay, these are our values as an organisation, therefore this is what it means for us as a team. So traditionally that might have been your MD or CEO working 12-hour days in an office and kind of doing the hard grind, and that setting the example for what that means for a team. So therefore your team sees it, that's the culture. That means we as a team have to be at our desks for 12 hours a day and do the hard grind and work beyond what's normal. And then that impacts you as an individual. So that then sets the precedent for you as an individual, knowing you've got to be in at 9 o'clock, you've got to stay at your desk, you've got to do the work, no lunch breaks, whatever it might be. And it's not always negative. It might also mean your MD says, actually, you can leave early to go and get your kids from school, or whatever it might be. But this is how traditional business culture is set up. The business sets the culture. That then informs how you work as a team, and that then informs how you are as an individual, from what you wear to how you act to the tools and services that you use to do your job. And there are different types of business culture that we see as a result of this. So I'm going to give you another matrix. I'm traditionally a designer, so I've come from a background of matrices and processes, and I hate myself for doing this, but I've tried to make it fun, so I hope my British 90s references translate. So along the bottom, you've got inflexible and flexible leadership styles. So inflexible being your more traditional, monolithic, big organisation, inflexible leaderships where working from home wasn't the norm till COVID. COVID happened, and then we kind of went back into this hybrid working, but actually we're slowly seeing a push to just go back into the office. It's kind of that mentality of, we'll be flexible when we have to be, but actually it's flexible on my terms, and it's not really flexible, it's very inflexible. That kind of don't want to change, won't change, what works now will work forever methodology. And along the bottom, you've got this kind of move toward really flexible leadership, which has its pitfalls. I'm not saying that's the best way to be, but that kind of flexible, we're going to do what happens, like be adaptive to how people work and what they need to do. And then along the top, you've got inflexible employees, so people who resist change by all means necessary. So often it's the kind of mentality of I'm in a job for life and I don't want anyone to come and change that. I don't want new tools, I don't want to work from home, I don't want a laptop, I just want to come in, do my job, go home, that kind of method. Through to flexible employees who kind of don't want that at all. They want the options to do what they want, how they want, when they want, on their terms, to suit their lifestyle. And I think newer generations are moving much more towards that flexible type of employee lifestyle. So when we've got inflexible leadership and flexible employees, sorry.
I'll change up a little bit, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, of course.
This is my cue then. It's too wide on the other side. I'm sorry, guys. Should the other side.
Ta-da! Yeah?
Like this?
It's a good job I'm not Madonna doing a dance. That isn't how I dance. So at the top we've got cultural collapse, where you've got inflexible leadership and flexible employees. And this kind of looks like they can leave if they want from your leaders. So you've got leaders who want things to stay exactly as they are and are resistant to change, but the employees are saying, no, there are better ways to do this, and kind of knocking on the door going, can we have this, can we have that, and the leaders go, no. And they'll keep saying no, and if they say to their employees, if you don't like it, you can leave. And you get high turnover, high apathy towards the workplace, and decisions really happen without any kind of consultation or anything taking place. And I call that cultural collapse, where the culture is just so set in stone that nothing really ever changes and people just leave, and employees at the top or the leaders just take that as part of their business as usual. We just have high turnover in this business, that's how it is. Cue the 90s reference, the Tasmanian devil. So this feels a bit like a whirlwind, where you might have loads of people joining who have great ideas, but the leadership just aren't there to listen to it, or there aren't routes for that innovation to get up and create change. When you have inflexible leadership and inflexible employees, you just get a fixed culture where no one's really motivated to change anyway. So the leaders are happy with how it's going because it works for them as it is, and so are the employees. And everyone's quite content, but there's no room for ideation or the space to create that positive conversation of how things could be. So it's just more of the same constantly. So you might get new technology kind of dripping in, but often you'll see it breaking or being built to fit the existing ways of working rather than how things could be. So I worked at a government organisation in the UK where they had all of this amazing accounting software, but they were still just using their Excel spreadsheets that they'd had done for 50 years and then uploading it to the new software rather than just all doing it in that. That kind of story sound familiar to anyone in the room? And you just see that time and time again, and that's where culture change becomes really important, because it's trying to understand what those barriers are to that change. So this is a fixed culture where it feels a bit like dinosaurs in the room. Did anyone watch Dinosaurs? Yeah, a few head nods. This was the one where I thought it might not land. I wasn't quite sure if this made it anywhere else. But that's what it looked like. It's kind of that, we're just going to keep going because it works for us. And then we've got transformative cultures where it's flexible leadership but inflexible employees. So the leaders are trying to create loads of positive change and do things, and these kind of often will look like digital transformation projects or cultural transformation initiatives, change projects as they are. But it always feels incredibly hard and difficult, and it's often jumping on the latest trend and implementing it because it's new rather than what's right. And this is actually where most organisations are in this kind of transformation cycle of implementing what's happening, whether it's agile, lean, again like the digital transformation headspace, just because it's what most people are doing, until the next thing comes along. And so you just finish one change programme and then the next one starts. And it just feels incredibly hard for employees because often they're just having to work through that without really any understanding of where it goes. And it always feels big and it always feels difficult. And this just feels like a big transformer. It's a big organisation trying to do the big changes. And actually where we want to get to is a space of adaptation, which is change little and often. The team are able, flexible employees are able to go to their flexible leaders and say, let's try this, we need to try this, and the space is there to try little things often. So that big change never feels quite as big, it feels digestible and small, and it happens in ways that make it easy for people to get on with their day-to-day and have a positive impact. And this is where we want to be trying to encourage our organisations, whether we're through team leadership, line management, or even at the senior level, to get to of kind of little frequent change so that it becomes business as usual. And the reason why it's called adaptation is because it's not transformation. We're not doing big whirlwind changes of what needs to happen. We're adapting to society as and when it needs to happen and change. And it's where we start to really unlock the powers of our team. And people can find the cultures that work for them within an organisation. So it can be whether that's your kind of what core working hours and changing them dependent on who's in the organisation or in your team at that time, and changing them as new people start and being able to communicate that regularly and openly with the wider organisation, through to understanding what times people want to take for lunch, whether it's an hour, half an hour, like all of those little things, but constantly adapting them so that people can work in ways that suit their lifestyle. So just to recap, cultural collapse is when culture doesn't really exist. It's hard to maintain. It's difficult. There's no change to the culture. Fixed is where it absolutely never changes. Your employees don't want change, and the leadership don't want change. They just want to keep going as it is. And this is where I like to think of Blockbuster, or kind of the big organisations that went out of business very quickly because they weren't able to change their cultures to suit the times. Transform is where it's unnecessarily hard, and this is where I really draw on my kind of big government organisations where that transformation work just feels difficult and tough and like muddy. And adapt is where it's easy. It's small, little changes frequently, so it becomes really easy across our teams. So how do we get to this adaptation? We need to flip the script of what culture looks like. And that means starting with your own culture. So your culture as an individual sits at the heart of business culture. That then informs how you operate as a team. So you have a really good understanding of you, your values, your principles, and that informs how you work together as a team across your department or the way, however you split your organisation up. And then that feeds into what your business culture is. So this isn't to say it's kind of a grassroots way of doing it. So your business still might set your values and your core and your mission, but your culture as an individual and as a team really defines how that translates across the entire business. I just see people taking pictures, so I'll wait for a second. So if we dig into your culture, this is I like to draw on a book by Julia Middleton called Cultural Intelligence, and she talks about the things that are in your core and the things that are in your flex. So the things that are in your core are the things that make you you, the things you won't budge on, and the things that are in your flex are the things that you don't really care about but might be in someone else's core. So knowing your core is knowing who you are, what your values are, the things that are your non-negotiables, and they're the things that make you you. So when I think about my core, I draw on my mum and dad's immigration story, and their roots are in Mauritius, which if anyone knows it, it's a tropical island in the Indian Ocean, and I live in the UK and was born in the UK, and constantly think, why did they leave? Because I'm not made for British winter. And the reason I draw on their story a lot is because of the values that they instilled in me from a young age. And I remember asking my dad once when he was younger, what his ambitions were, and he actually was like, I never wanted to own a house or really be an adult. I just wanted to live in a little shack on a beach, and that would be my life. And it was really humbling to hear that, because he does own his house and he's got 3 kids who all went to university. But it took me back to kind of the basics of where my roots were and what the ambitions were for my parents when they were younger and what they could see, and just how far they had come from that. And I carry that with me into all of the places that I work in and the way that I talk and how I do the work that I do, because knowing who I am and what makes me me is such a huge part of how I operate as a team, and the work that I do in research and talking to users and understanding all of the cultures that exist. It's part of who I am. And that really helps me understand what's in my flex. So this is the stuff that makes other people comfortable. So the example I like to draw on is I did work in Pakistan and had to wear a headscarf in most of my meetings. I don't really care what I wear, but in that instance, what I wore made other people comfortable, and it was part of the culture there, and it had a really big impact for the conversations and the spaces I was in. So it's not in my core, it was in my flex, it was something I could give to people to make other people feel comfortable and open up conversations there. So it's the things that we can do in our day-to-day life that make other people comfortable, and it's just as important to know what's in your flex as it is to know what's in your core. If you have too much in your core, you become that kind of grumpy old person who never changes and is constantly like, in my day, this isn't how we do things. But if you have too much in your flex, you become that stereotypical, I don't care about anything and I'll adapt to every situation I have, but it's really difficult to know what you stand for. So you need to have an understanding of what's in both to be able to have these fruitful conversations to create your culture. And the reason why this is so important, and actually this didn't really become clear to me until I became a parent, is if you don't put your culture first, you can't put other people's. Like if you don't know what you stand for, it's really then difficult to build the empathy and understanding for other people and their culture, because you don't have a starting point to say where you stand with it, or whether you agree with the ways of working or how you want to approach things. And that goes for the people in your teams, but also the people that you're building for and the way that they're going to interact with your services. So what does it look like in practice? I use a tool called user manuals, and I'm hoping I'll be able to send the links out, but I've got a blank template for this, and it asks you questions about what's in your core, what's in your flex, how you work, what stresses you out, what you look like when you're in the zone and flourishing. And it's a starting point for being able to just document all of the things that make you you. And the idea is that you use these with the teams that it's a living document that you update as your life changes and circumstances change, and that you can share with people that you're working with to help then have these conversations about your culture. And that all starts with your principles and who you are and how you work. And it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. It's not about politics, it's about empathy and understanding how we are impacted by what's happening in the world and the things that are going on around us. And that then leads on to team culture. So I believe that team culture really sits in allyship and understanding how we all work together and how to have each other's backs when times get tough. And this breaks down into values and behaviours. I'm just going to do a time check. And this breaks into values and behaviours. So our values as a team are what you have in common. So if you take those user manuals and you kind of go through them together as a team, you can start to see the commonalities across them. So common times where people flourish, or environments that help people thrive. And it can show you when things don't work. So you might have really different values as a team, and that's okay. It's just trying to focus on how you help lift those up for people. So if you've got a night owl and someone who loves mornings, what's the middle ground for both of those people to work in ways that really help everyone flourish? And that translates into behaviours. So if we value a diverse team with different cultures, what does that mean for the behaviours that we want to exhibit? And that might mean celebrating everything together. So in your user manuals and the way that you're working, you'll hopefully start to see some of these coming out, and you can turn those values into behaviours and ways of working. So you've got a direct route from here's who I am as an individual, this is what it means for our team and how we then operate. And so what does this look like in practice? It's a team canvas, so you take your user manual and all of those things, you pull them together into your common team values, and you start to map it out into a team canvas where you start to see people, roles, what you value, and then ultimately what your purpose is as a team. And this is a strategize template, so you'll be able to find it online. And that helps you then kind of put your rules and actions into place and the goals that you have of working together. And you start to review this as your team grows. So it's part of your team building and rhythms and rituals to do this regularly so that it never dies. It becomes a living thing that you can review together and start to see when things are working and when they're not. And it also means starting safe spaces. In order to get to this place, we need to be able to be in an environment where people are safe to be open and vulnerable and can have conversations about who they are and what they believe in without it having any repercussions on their day-to-day. And that means building trust and leadership to know that that's okay and that's how it works. Within the parameters of kind of HR policy and all of that kind of stuff, but safe spaces are crucial for this. And it also means celebrating microcultures. So what you might start to see is if you're working with individuals to define your team culture, your tech team might operate in a very different way to your sales team and have different cultures, but that's okay. Not everyone in an organisation has to work the same, as long as they have the same values across them. That might be determined by business or whatever it might be. As long as there's that commonality, it's okay. But that also means you have to over-communicate with other teams. You have to be really clear about ways of working with each other so that you know the tech team aren't in on Wednesdays, so that's when the sales team can do all their calls, or whatever it might be, however you want it to work. But it's over-communicating so that it's really clear to people what those cultures are and celebrating them along the way. So what does this actually mean for business culture? And this is where I want to dive into diversity a bit more. So often we had a narrative of culture fit, so hiring for culture fit, which means more of the same, versus culture add, which is actually bringing in that diversity. So culture fit is often, do you think, look, talk like me? It is just more of the same. It's saying, do they fit into this culture? Are they going to rock the boat? What do they bring? Whereas culture add is actually diversity. It's where we're starting to look for different perspectives, different ways of working, different perspectives that can help challenge that. So it's not to say you're going to hire someone who completely goes against your organisation and its values and its outlook, but you're looking for those different perspectives that can change the way that you might be thinking or bring some sort of nuance to it. And that often is rooted in different backgrounds, and there's loads of stuff around, actually I'll go into it in a second, around how to do this. It's reviewing your hiring processes. So in the UK in particular, everyone I work with, I ask them to take out the mandatory having a university education as part of the recruitment process. Because what that's saying is you have to have achieved a certain educational attainment to be able to work here, which falls right into that culture fit narrative rather than culture add, because you can get that experience in loads of different ways rather than having a university degree. And that's just one example of where we start to push people towards that culture fit rather than culture add. It's little things like having a salary in a job advert is statistically proven to put women off at applying for jobs versus men. So women are less likely to apply for a job if they can't see the salary expectation. And things like that make it really difficult to kind of go into that culture add rather than culture fit. And that's just the kind of basic stuff of hiring processes. There's who's on the hiring panel, have we let people know the questions beforehand? How are we making sure people with different neurodiversity needs are catered for and tailored for? How are we looking after people through that? And it also means starting to collect data. So we can't solve a problem if we don't know it exists. The data we need to collect isn't just around your general statistics of hires and starters. It's actually trying to uncover where we might have unconscious biases in our culture and in our processes. So if we can start to see a trend of women in their 30s who've just started to have children leaving an organisation, you start to realise that actually maybe this isn't a place where people can thrive if they have children. And these are all things that have started to come to light when I've started to look at the data in organisations. There's also, we've had situations where I've worked with businesses who start to collect the data of progression within an organisation, so internal promotions. And they have a really diverse ethnic mix at a kind of junior level, but a very white middle management level, despite everyone trying to apply for those roles. And once they started to collect the data, they could start to see that people of colour just weren't getting through the barrier. And so that meant they could do an internal review to try and change what might be happening across that was getting in people's way or not supporting everyone through internal promotions. So it can open doors to having those conversations because the data's there to prove it. And what I've seen is when having conversations with senior leaders at kind of board level, is this the data that matters? It's not the stories, it's actually having the numerical data there to show where the problems exist, to then unlock the conversations about how we can change it. So if that's what organisational culture looks like, how does a conscious culture actually change your business? And it's really being supported at work. It's creating the environments where you can bring your whole self to work if you choose to, and it's giving the people the choice of saying, you can be who you need to be in the office, and if that's the same person you are at home, great, and if you want to be someone different at work, that's also fine. But it's giving people that choice to be who they want to be, so that we can actually be vulnerable at work and bring that vulnerability with us, because it helps us build better technology. And it's that vulnerability that enables us to understand how people are being impacted, when people's mental health might be flagging, and what we can do as employers to create those safe spaces to have those conversations and put in the practices and policies that can have really positive impact. And the knock-on effect of this is creating environments that help us change the world and put better technology out there, so that we're not solving the same problems for the same people, but we're having a greater impact on the products and services that we're creating. But it also makes business sense. It lowers your employee leavers rates, which means people are with you for longer, so you're spending less on recruitment and less on internal training. But it also just means you're solving the problems that matter to everyone, and you're leaving less unknowns in what you're doing. Because life happens, and it's important to know that the difference between your work life and your home life, that line is blurring. And we need to be creating businesses for the future that recognise life happens and create the space for people to support them as that life happens, whether it's internationally, political, or just at home when something bad happens. And it's important to do it so that we're building technology, products, and employment opportunities for the future, so people like my daughter have somewhere to go and things to access. I couldn't do a presentation without having a face. Thank you. I'm going to open to questions now. I think we've got 10 minutes. So. Any questions?
I have a little question. Thank you for the talk. It was very interesting. What triggers me is about when we look for new employees, we always search for the cultural fit. Somebody lately told me you have to add diversity, you search for a cultural add, but it can be challenging when you have like a team, everybody looks like one another, there's a strong culture, and then if you want to start adding diversity, I would like to ask you, how do you address that challenge for the new colleagues?
Yeah, so there's a big element of psychological safety for that. So it's ensuring that there's kind of a really practical first step, which is ensuring everyone in the workplace has gone through some sort of cultural awareness training and understanding the importance of unconscious bias and what that might look like, and microaggressions and how to overcome those kind of things if everyone does look the same in particular. It's then ensuring that the person who you're bringing in who might be different is supported through that, so knowing that they can come to you if something goes wrong, or if they might have experienced a microaggression, who they can go to, and having people aware that it's happening and being able to call it out. And there are really good software solutions to be able to do that kind of reporting or anonymous reporting to help make it easier as well. But in terms of actually getting diverse people into an organisation, a lot of it starts with grassroots, going out to different communities and saying we've got this opportunity and here's how we're hiring or changing our ways of working or practice. And that goes beyond saying on a job advert, like, we're dedicated to improving our diversity. It's showing what that plan is and having a strategy in place and what that statement might look like. And that's a whole other stream of work of like cultural diversity strategies and putting it in as a piece of work rather than an add-on to what you're doing as well. And hiring processes is just one part of that. It's, are there any local meetups that you can go to where there might be other people that you can speak to or who can advise you on what it looks like? And it's also looking to the big organisations about what good looks like. So Monzo have a really great initiative and diversity framework that they use. And it's working with people to try and improve that safety in the workplace as well. That's okay.
How would you give more room to people in the workspace to show their personal culture?
Yeah, so I've worked with organisations, so the question, sorry, I should repeat the question. So the question was, how can you give space to personal space to employees to show their culture? And I've worked with organisations who once a month do like a lunch and learn, and it's optional for people to self-select if they want to do it. But as a chance to share and talk about the culture that they come from, or a topic that they're interested in, or something that helps show them, because it's not always where you come from or your upbringing. It might be an interest that you have, or talking about hip hop or whatever it might be. And it's a nice way to learn about one another and have a conversation about those interests and who you are, where you come from. And organisations that do this really well often have a budget for it, so lunch is catered for, it helps bring people in, it helps celebrate all of those cultures and bring a conversation to it as well. And what's quite nice is it can be self-selected, but if you have a line management system, you might then encourage other people to kind of do it and say, I think you'd be really good if you talked about this at a lunch and learn, and giving people time to prep and not having a standard. It's kind of, you can just show up and talk, or if you want to have slides, you can have slides, or it could be an opportunity to practice public speaking as well, and that kind of thing. So that's a really good way that I've seen that happen.
In your 90s matrix,
Yeah.
it's obviously, that's why we like and dislike matrices at the same time. It's easy to explain something, but in practice, of course, let's say it's fairly easy to make sure that your leadership is all flexible. It's like 10 people, let's say, so it's kind of easy to make sure you hire them to be flexible or whatever.
Yeah.
But in your workforce, there's a diversity of flexible and inflexible people. So let's say there's a clash of Power Rangers and Transformers going on within the company.
Yeah.
So how do you go about that? Because forcing, I mean, if you take a stance that the Transformers have to become Power Rangers rather than the other way around, it's also, taking an opinion and forcing people in a direction. So what do we say about that?
Yeah, so the question is around that tension between Power Rangers and Transformers, so kind of inflexible and flexible leadership, really. And what I'd say is, in an ideal world, you'd find something that works for both, and it goes to me to that core and flex. It's understanding what's core to the flexible and inflexible. That means you can't shake it or change it, and what's in each of their gifts in the flexibility that they can suit each other. And if you have like good documentation about what that looks like for each of those leaders and their teams, you can start to have a conversation of, okay, we have to work, well, our core hours have to be these because that's what works for our team, but we can be flexible about what days that's on, or maybe there's once a week where we all come in together to work, and that's where you can start to have those fruitful conversations. I think the important bit isn't forcing someone down the flexible and inflexible route. It's more the willingness to have a conversation about it and being open to some of that change. And that's where the growth mindset is more important than the kind of stagnated one. And it takes the kind of overall leader of the organisation, so either board level, C level, whatever it might look like, to kind of set that mandate still and say this is how we're working and why. And it's not you have to change everything, but these are little bits that we're going to start to play with at first. And as you scale, it does become harder to do, but that's where the documentation becomes important. So being able to say these are our ways of working, this is what it means for us and our culture, It's not, and as I say, it's not, you have to change everything, and it's not changing everything at once, but it's understanding what you can play with to make people feel comfortable. Any other questions? Thank you. Oh, one last one, sorry.
Do you believe in the bottom-top change when it comes to having flexible employees but inflexible leadership? And how would you go about it?
Yeah, so I think, so the question was how do I believe in a bottom-up approach to changing things and flexible employees but against the kind of inflexible leadership? I've worked in organisations where I've been the flexible employee trying to knock on the door of really inflexible staff, like leaders, and I got told you'll have to wait for me to retire before you can do any of that. And I left the organisation, and I think that's the risk you face when in those circumstances. If I had someone else that I could talk to who might have been able to say, don't bother knocking on their door, but these are the doors you should knock on, and then you might be able to create the change another way, that would have changed my whole experience there. And that's where I think mentoring within an organisation and moving beyond the structures that are there can be really helpful, and knowing what that looks like for different places. So that's the advice I would give to someone who's trying to do that bottom-up approach, is find your allies who might not sit in your direct line management, but beyond it. And if not, if you are privileged enough to be able to find another job and leave, that's the kind of biggest way of showing people that that's not gonna work. Not to say that works for everyone, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that either, because it's draining trying to do the bottom-up approach if you haven't got that allyship at a top level, the sponsor to kind of push you up and help it going, unless you create enough critical mass on the ground where you're creating that kind of need for change and proving it, which is what I call the stealth mode of culture change. Is you get a lot of people working differently that then prove the benefits, that then suddenly it becomes a light bulb moment for those inflexible leadership styles to say, okay, we have to do this now. But it takes time and effort, so it's whether you've got the energy to kind of put that in and do it that way. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.